welcome to the next session. This is about the great big gender dividend, winning the fight for female talent. And before I introduce the rest of the panel today, unfortunately, one of our panel members couldn't be with us today due to a personal issue, and that's Katie Todd, who's the head of network expansion sales for Virgin Media. What I'd like to do now is get the panel to introduce themselves, and before we get into the main session itself. So can we start with Fiona, please?
Sure. Hi, Amanda, and hello to everybody. My name is Fiona O'Brien. I am the Chief Channel Officer for Europe, Middle East and Africa for Lenovo, and I'm also Chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Board.
Thank you. And Ad?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Ad Boon. I used to be the Senior Vice President for HR for Royal Philips and also Senior Vice President for Qatar Airways. Now I work as an executive coach and also am an advisor to some of the startup companies in the US, but also some of the healthcare companies here in Europe.
Okay, and Rashi?
Thanks, Amanda. Hello, everyone. My name is Rashi Sikka, and I'm the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Ubisoft. Thank you so much for having me. This is a really pertinent conversation and very, very timely.
Thank you. And finally, myself, I'm Amanda Mackay. I'm the Quality and Assurance Director for Balfour Beatty Givenchy. We're one of the contractors working on HS2 near the Birmingham area at the moment. Thank you. So we have a number of sort of areas we want to cover today, and as I've already mentioned around the dividend. But the first question I want to pose to the panel today for us to discuss is that whilst the last decade has seen a huge drive in equality, the last 12 months of the pandemic has seen a great increase in inequality, particularly across the UK. So what do you think are the practical steps organisations can take to reverse this process? I'd like to open that up to the wider group.
I don't know who wants to go first, but I'll jump into the fray then initially. So probably a couple of comments. I mean, I think we can say for sure there has been big progress on equality over maybe the past 50 years, but even pre-pandemic, we were maybe seeing a slowing down in some critical areas. So while the pandemic has for sure exacerbated some challenges and maybe is pushing some females out of the workforce, I don't think we cracked the code. So I don't think we can say we can only fix pandemic style issues or things that have bubbled up because of that. I think there is still systemic long-term challenges that we're going to have to address. Because I think if you look at some of the stats, and there are many, really since 2015, we have seen the slowing down, and we still are looking at a gap of 100 years to have women in leadership at an equitable level, and even more than 100 years to have parity of pay. And that's just not acceptable. Now, the challenge of people stepping out of the workforce and the pandemic is maybe bringing it to everybody's mind. It's maybe throwing it into crisis. But it doesn't negate the need to really get to the core of what these challenges are. And you ask Amanda about practicalities, and I think that's where it has to be, right? It has to be practical at an individual level, right? So how do you craft for the individual to take advantage of the women who are in the workforce today and help them succeed? But then how do you transform at a cultural level an organization to make it more equitable? And if there's one good thing to extract from the pandemic, in my view, is that it has brought even the most ardent traditionalists to the table of understanding some of the barriers that have been faced, particularly in the area of maybe that invisible barrier, which is unpaid care, and the responsibilities that maybe are falling at an unnatural level on women. And even people who have struggled with that in the past are probably being exposed to it more because we're all at home. and we're all having to adapt. And it's maybe opening some eyes. And I think we need to take advantage of that now that the conversation is going and the eyes are open. Let's talk about the practical steps. But, let me invite my colleagues on the panel to also make some commentary.
Rashi?
Sure, I can go next. Thank you, Fiona, for kicking us off. I think the first 20 seconds are always the most awkward. So appreciate you stepping in. And absolutely, I think the points that you made resonates very, very clearly. Just to add on to that, I know we've all seen the research, right, from the UK, from the US and other countries that have highlighted the backward steps that we've taken in many ways. And what's really interesting is that even within that conversation, we're not speaking about women of color, queer women, trans women, women with disabilities, and more. And I think we do need to approach this from an intersectional lens, because if we, whatever practical tips or solutions that we come up with, if we don't look at it from that lens of intersectionality, we will still not be equitable in the approaches that we recommend. So that's just something that's very top of mind for me as I do this work. I think the second piece is, and again, adding to what Fiona said about caregiving, paid care. That's definitely come to the top, right? As caregivers have been struggling, being on Zoom or Teams 20, for 10 to 12 hours a day, and trying to manage caregiving responsibilities at the same time. Inclusion and flexibility are linked. And I think that's something that we need to address as we talk about pragmatic, practical solutions. But beyond that, I think there's a huge need for behavioral change. I think when we were having this conversation, we spoke about the traditional 8-hour work week, or the 8-hour work day, the 40-hour work week. And that's such an archaic concept. It's from the 1800s. It's patriarchal nature. How do we dismantle some of these things and have conversations that are much more relevant for the time that we're in today? Those are some of the thoughts that that are top of mind. I haven't offered any practical solutions, I'm aware, but these are the things that I think we should be thinking about.
That's some really good points.
Yeah, and I think both Fiona and Rashi make really good comments, although maybe not practical. I think they are inspiring, and they should instill practical thinking into everybody in the audience. I think that the additional things I can offer is that what I'm seeing is that if you want to look practical, is really start looking into how you can get more female talent into the workplace in the first place, right? So I think what I've seen in the last couple of years is that the TA organizations, particularly in global companies, have really stepped up. They've really looked into their employer brand, just to make sure it's more inviting for female talent to join. And we've seen the same thing also with companies with their overall brand, right? All their brand recognition, the way they express their brand, the way they express their language, even changing their products and sort of how they market their products has really helped also with the female, with the gender diversity in the workplace. But as the TA department's also looked into and Fiona, you and I discussed this also when we had the pre-discussion in sort of the way we craft the roles within organizations and the way we market those. We don't use like masculine words anymore. It's like strong and things like that, much more appealing. Our assessment methodologies have become much more transparent. We are much more careful for unconscious bias in those assessment methodologies. And I think that should be the standard, what's being used by all the talent acquisition organizations. Also, I think what we're now doing is that we're not looking so much into sort of the employee experience, which we all look into, but we look into the employee life experience. Because I think particularly the research tells us that female talent and to drive gender diversity in companies is really looking at the whole life perspective of the context of how particularly females in organizations come in, and things like mental health, stability at the home front, rest, nutrition, that all comes into play, and more companies are bringing in coaches, support, just to make sure we cater for that. And it just brings out so much more of an inclusive leadership style into females as well. And that's my dog. My apologies for that. Which brings me to the last comment, actually. And this may be funny, but it's not. I think also we should look at men, right? The contribution of men in the home as stimulated by companies. I'm walking the dogs. I'm also doing the dishes. I know actually what the dryer looks like versus a washing machine. I know how to cook, but I also know we have 6 kids. I also know how to look after them and also create an emotional bond with them. It makes my life richer. But it's also been stimulated by the companies I've been part of. Those companies enabled me to do that. And I think also that's a practical implementation we should look at overall companies as well. Just a few things from my side.
I think you raised some really good points there. I mean, I work in a sector that is very traditionally been male-dominated in construction and infrastructure. And we recognized a long time ago that our talent pipeline needed to be much broader. We had a skill shortage. And as a sector that's probably weathered COVID a little bit better than many others, we've been allowed to continue work. Whilst many of us have worked from home, we've recognised, we have a much wider female population in our frontline work now, engineers and project managers and agents, even plant operators, scaffolders, steel fixers. Now, we've seen that change that could have happened with many people going back to the home working and caregiving roles. Of actually, their partners have stepped up. And sometimes their partners have worked in other industries which allowed them to make that change. And it's been really enlightening to hear. We had our International Women's Day talk, and some of them talking about their partners stepping up and taking on the duties that they would normally have been expected to go back and do, because they're in a sector that's working, and their partners are in a sector where they're home working at the moment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the difficulty there, if I may add, Amanda, the difficulty there is that it's like if men would do that, like they move over to the dark side, which is we need to help them with that. Sometimes they just don't know how to have that discussion or how to voice it. But you start to see great role models as well. Even just yesterday, maybe it was this morning, I can't remember. I saw the CEO of Zalando step down or will be stepping down because they, in a discussion with his wife, they said, we're going to prioritize your career right now for the next couple of years versus mine. Mm-hmm. And I think sort of that balance, I think that's what we should be looking for. And men just struggle with that sort of voicing that. And I see that in many of my coaching clients, they all struggle with it, but they're willing to do it. So, that's just something I think if we make that dialogue possible within companies, that should also help.
Yeah, I think you have to do both, right? So of course there's the societal change that help men understand, and then there's the individual relationship that you have with your partner to help them understand that, and then there's the company and what the company can do to support it, because you can introduce flexible working policies, but then you have to talk the talk, right? So you have to demonstrate that you can use them, because oftentimes both male and female can be afraid to take advantage of those flexible working policy because there will be a negative perception of them. It will be held against you for career progression and so on. So you have to be able to demonstrate in a corporate environment that you want people to take advantage of these arrangements. That's why they're there. I saw a great one recently. It was my husband's company, and his boss's boss was very clear that he was not going to do calls at a particular time of the day because himself and his wife were both homeschooling, and she did one slot of time and he did the other. So diaries blocked out. That's just the way it is. That's the way it's going to be. And just by him doing that, it sets the tone of, well, okay, he does it, other people can do it, so I'm taking advantage of the policy. And I think that's absolutely critical. And it really is allyship, because it is demonstrating for, women need to take advantage of it. There is a support mechanism there. It's not frowned upon. This is a change of culture at the heart of a company.
Yeah.
I'd love to just add to that. I think this conversation is really interesting, especially when we're talking about people with caregiving responsibilities, which seems to be the focus right now. But I do want to be cognizant that, there are women in the workforce who are not parents or don't have caregiving responsibilities, and they are being impacted as well, right? So when we think about flexibility, of course, caregiving and parenting is a huge part of that, but we also have to have this conversation for the broader groups. So that's just one piece that I'd like to highlight.
That's fair.
And on the note of parenting and caregiving, I'm curious to see not many companies around the world actually have equal parental leave policies, right, for both parents or caregivers. And those are conversations that we should be having. I know some companies are setting the model for that, and I think this change that we're hoping to see and we're trying to drive seems to become much more responsibility of corporates than government right now. Corporates leading the way and the government trying to play, policymakers trying to play catch up to some extent. But really, I think we should be addressing this conversation for all women in an organization.
Yeah, that's. I fully agree. If I may comment to that, I mean that's obviously when you address one group, you forget the other group. So I'm glad you're bringing that balance, Rashi. That is fair. Just, one other comment, Amanda, if you allow me to make on. I think when we first in the last decade saw the shift where countries were not able to provide the right educational support to support the right talent built into the organizations. You saw companies step up, and they invested more in L&D programs and provided support in sort of growth, mental growth, but also competency growth for employees across the board. Where I think it also helped the gender diversity in a tremendous way. I think also what I would envision companies also to do is step up on the social ecosystem around females in particular in company, but also younger men in particular, just to make sure they get to meet other people, they network, they have roles that allow them to travel, of course, if post pandemic, but also take a responsibility there just to make sure there's an easier work and life combination possible for the different types of groups. And I think if companies can help to facilitate that I believe would also help, and there's a role to play.
Yeah, some really good points there. Sort of moving on with our conversation, how do we evaluate the good practice and transfer it to other sectors, and particularly exploring sectors where we see a better gender balance at executive and leadership levels? Are there any sectors that are better at this than others? Rashi?
I always one of the things that I always say is that I don't really believe there are best practices. I think there are good practices that work for some companies and that might not work for others, and you kind of have to tweak them and make them your own. What I do think, especially in light of COVID and more recently in the whole working from home model, I'm seeing more and more companies. I think Spotify is a good example for being in the news quite recently. Salesforce, Microsoft, or a few others that come to mind that have been really leading the charge on what it means to be flexible, what does remote working actually mean, and giving those opportunities to their workforce, which is a much more innovative approach to the way that we have been working in the past. So I think there are some companies that are thinking about this in a more different way, asking their workforce what works for them. Knowing my organization right now, there's a whole conversation on neurodiversity and working from home versus working in the office. And it's a really important and interesting conversation that's going on at the moment. We haven't reached any conclusion just yet. But I think with everything that's happened in the last 12 months, the changes that we're seeing from an HR perspective have really accelerated, and I think people are being much more open to innovation in this space. So those are some of my thoughts, Amanda, to the question that you asked right now.
Thank you.
Amanda, what I have seen is a number of organizations are developing kind of equity frameworks to give some guiding principles to organizations, and flexible working is for sure one of them, but it's not the only one by any means. So it's enabling you to create that culture of value and that value of inclusion, and demonstrate that you value an inclusive workforce. So looking at things like training on unconscious bias. Ad made some commentary about recruitment and how do we adapt our recruitment process, our job specification. Also, our expectations internally. So when we do things like running performance reviews, you move away from the annualized performance review where unconscious bias can start to play a very big role because you assume a lot of things, on an annualized basis. And generally that has played against both women and minority groups generally, where people maybe are more likely to demonstrate some of their bias, to moving evaluations to very project, in the moment, task-based feedback, which removes a lot of that. So I think that this concept of structure and forcing us to look at the whole thing holistically, be it policy, be it culture, be it training, recruitment, it is a building block of items that need to be put in place for us to truly address the issues and to accelerate the move towards equity. The one thing that concerns me is, regardless of flexibility or not, we still have a broken rung somewhere, particularly in my industry in tech. So we tend not to have a problem of recruitment in. Right now, I'm speaking very much, from my organization. We have a good and a higher than average representation of women coming into entry level position, but we see a marked drop off as they move through the organization, and that is for sure flexibility, but it is many other things at play as well. And until we get that right, until we look at that holistically, it starts to turn you off, right? So you see a drop off, right? Because if you have a barrier that you're constantly hitting against, it is very, very frustrating for that female workforce. And therefore, you're likely to reset your expectations or look to another career or step away from that frustration if you feel you cannot overcome that barrier. So I think by introducing this framework concept, we start to be able to chip away at all the elements that are stopping us generating that equity.
Yeah, I mean, Fiona displays a typical example why I believe that technology is strong in this field. To answer your question, Amanda, because so if you're, I don't speak for all the diversity and inclusion leaders, right? But for me, this sounds like, so this is like the truth, and this is what we need to do. And I see that also in the luxury segment as well. Louis Vuitton, L'Oreal, they're like light years ahead. Maybe not light years as a gross overstatement, but they're ahead of the pack, to answer your question, Amanda. Yeah. And I also believe that we struggle sometimes to recruit the right global D&I leaders as well, sometimes promoted from internal. But it's become such a mature, profession might not be the wrong word, but it's an expertise that we need to start building up over time as well. But we have some really strong D&I leaders in technology and also in luxury. And I believe to set up a system like a cohort coaching or just a sharing platform where they take some of the responsibility for building this globally, also towards other industries, and for those other industries to be invited to that discussion, I believe is really much needed. Just to add to that, if I may.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that, certainly within my sector, we had that skill shortage. We are trying to address that by being being more attractive to a wider group of people. In terms of our gender balance, construction's always been quite low. Where the construction industry set itself targets to improve. My own organisation to the target of 20% by 2020, but it was 20% across all levels of the organisation, particularly in technical and leadership levels. And one of the areas that we looked at was how do we empower younger women in the workplace? How do we give them the confidence and the skills to be able to challenge and to be able to go for roles which they may not necessarily see themselves as being professionally qualified to do, but more than capable of doing? Took away some of those barriers around saying you must have a degree in engineering, you must have a certificate in this, or you must have spent so many years on site. And those confidence building areas have helped people to move on in the organisation. We now see in our future and aspiring leaders courses a lot more young women wanting to be in that space and moving on. We're still not cracked the board level appointments yet. And I think that's an area where, if I look across the built environment sector, if you look at consultants and the more white collar areas, design and engineering, you will see a much better picture of gender balance. Whereas in contractors, we're still struggling in that space at the moment. But
it's like our brains still need to get adjusted to exactly what you just said, Amanda, because I think that's a great point. Because you see more companies also in their hiring process letting go of experience criteria, overall. And even my mind is still going like, what? Experience is not needed or not valued. You just have to be of this demographic, have this background, things like that. But I think that is the new reality.
But it's not, when you say you're letting go of experience and you need to more be of a demographic, it's skill. It's the skill set you're looking for. It's the characteristics you're looking for. And that's what you want to double down on, not the demographic or the background. But I think we severely underestimate the impact that a hire has in terms of fitting into a culture of an organization is almost as important as whatever years of experience they have written on the CV, right? You have to be able to adapt into the culture of the org. Because that something that really frustrates me, and maybe Rashi sees the same coming in in the broader tech role. When I talk about women coming into the organization, many of my colleagues have been saying to me, well, we have a shortage of talent. We can't find a woman for the role. Yeah, we shortlist too, but we couldn't quite see it as a cultural fit. I'm like, hold on a second. I am surrounded by extremely talented, strong women in my network, in my organization, in the broader industry. And I challenge this issue of, we couldn't find the right person. You have to be open to finding the right person, right? You have to ask the right questions of them to give them the opportunity. And we also have to be very careful not to land this on the shoulders of women themselves. You need to do a course. You need to be more confident. You need to speak up more. Rashi's able to speak up. I'm able to speak up. Speaking up's not the problem. We are generating a very high proportion of intelligent young women coming out of university. They are doing extremely well in third level. So that's not the problem. The culture they're coming into is the problem. The companies they're going into are the problem. So if we've been asked to change as women, companies can also change. Companies can be what they want to be if they have the will to create an inclusive culture. So I really, I'm quite forceful about wanting to shift the focus onto where the issue is residing, and not constantly feeling, as another thing to add guilt to me, it's my fault I'm not promoted. I think we need to get the balance right. Rashmi, I don't know if you
no,
thank
you for saying that. I always say we need to fix the system, not the people, right? Yeah. What's broken is the system. What's broken is our processes, right? In an organization, we need to dismantle those processes, remove bias, disrupt the bias that exists, and rebuild with inclusion at its core. So when you were talking earlier about, equitable frameworks and, I think companies need to take a much more systemic approach to inclusion, equity, and diversity versus doing programs that force women and underrepresented groups to feel less than, right? And that has been the approach in many instances. But I absolutely, agree with what you were saying, Fiona, about, the talent acquisition process. I think it's I hear this day in and day out. I do consulting work. I have my own consulting business as well, where I consult with early stage tech startups and scale-ups. And it doesn't matter who you're talking to. The pipeline problem comes up every single time. And, as a de&i practitioner and a de&i leader, it's, I hear it, I listen to it. I absolutely disagree with it. And I try and challenge it, right? What the problem is our descriptions and our expectations. We have decided to use other institutions' definition of good talent as our own, right? So we say an Ivy League, that means this person is going to be talent. This person went to so-and-so institute or worked at so-and-so organization, that means they're going to be good talent. Why? Right? We need to challenge that. Every time we add, and I agree with what you said about experience versus experience and skill set, right? It's not the same as pedigree, right? But most job descriptions, even today, ask for qualifications and certifications, which, it's a question to ask. Why? Why do we need that? Another notion that I like to challenge is culture fit, actually. Lots of organizations use culture fit. And for me, culture fit is a synonym to, are you like me? Versus culture act, which is, are you bringing something new to our organization? And are we going to be able to thrive in our environment? And are we going to be able to flex to your needs? Right. And I think that's something that we need to be talking about much more than culture fit, because culture fit tells us that this individual needs to assimilate, which is not what we're trying to do as diversity and inclusion professionals. So those are some of my, this conversation on pipeline, on talent acquisition, on job descriptions is a deep one and can go on for quite some time. But in addition to that, one of the thoughts that came to my mind was, I think, Fiona, as you were talking about the progression of talent in an organization, I think McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report from, I think, last year, spoke about the cliff, right? We all spoke about the glass ceiling for such a long time. And what they found there is that for every 100 men being promoted to manager, I think the number was only 78 women made it to that entry level, the first manager role. So we have a problem right there. Even though men and women are in this are starting at parity in the entry level roles in most organizations, especially in the tech space, as they reach that first level of promotion to manager, we see them drop off. Yeah. We're not at parity. So how are we going to ever reach equity in the long run, right? That's why it's going to take us 100 years to make that happen. And that's far, far, far too much in the future for us to be okay with it.
Yeah, agree.
I had a question for you, actually. So Gallup Research recently sized global employee engagement to be 15%. It sized the UK at just 10%. How do the panel see employment of more feminine skills improving that situation?
Oh, that's now I'm going to sound contentious again, and I'm sorry, but I also don't like the description of feminine skill. I hear a lot this idea that women are more collaborative and better communicators and with more empathy. Maybe so, maybe not. I mean, we're individuals. some women I have worked with, most definitely do not demonstrate those skills, and certainly some of the best managers I've had as men absolutely do. So I worry about that construct. I think we have to re-question leadership, right, and re-question management in a new environment, right? We have an opportunity now, because of this pandemic, to maybe reset the workplace. What do we want the future workplace to look like? What are the skills that we value in leaders, regardless of gender? We are working in environments, many of us, that are not production lines anymore. They're not in the traditional manufacturing of a thing. They are much softer, and we are connected in very different ways, right? All of us are talking on these environments constantly. It requires a very different set of skills to manage a workforce in this world. So how do we foster that, right? Regardless of the individual, how do we train the whole organization towards more collaboration and empathy and understanding? So that would be the first thing. And employee engagement, we in Lenovo run engagement surveys on an annualized basis to give people the opportunity to speak up. And we also did some investigation specifically around diversity and inclusion and how people want to be in the workplace. And I think the major thing that we hear constantly played back to us is they want to recognize a value fit between their own personal values and the organization. That's a critical element. They want to be heard, and they want to be supported. And I think if you can build an environment that listens and that hears and responds to its employee needs, and that shares a set of values that is very clear about its values, then you give people the opportunity to engage more. And I think that's the finding that we've had, is that constant communication, that constant refinement, but the very clear communication on our core value has meant that employees were better able to engage with us as an employer.
Thank you, Fiona.
Fully agree. I'd love to say smart things, but I so agree with you. Mm-hmm. It's. I think you speak the truth, and I think if companies can start from an organization's perspective, deploy a culture where just everybody fits in, and think design from that lens, and design from its work and life. It is goals, and it is empathy, vulnerability, a connection. I think it's just a way for more people to fit in and to feel that they fit in and feel that they can deliver up to whatever promise they made to themselves, right? And Rashid, I think to your earlier point, I think that is very systemic. It is how generations have been raised, also how we've been raised by our parents, to change that mindset. But I do sense, and Rashid, I do believe and hope with you that's not going to take 100 years. But I do sense that we are rapidly evolving that. But if it goes into a direction that you've just voiced out, Fiona, which I really learned from, that's the environment I would like to work in too.
Yeah. Great. There's some really good points in there. And I think where you see really good culture, it doesn't really matter about the skill set and thing that people do genuinely gel together. I've worked in organizations where they had that, but they tended to be smaller companies rather than the larger companies, where that culture pervaded from the senior leaders right the way down to people on the shop floor. In larger organizations, I've seen some good practice, but not where it should be.
And maybe, Mandy, if I can make one last particular point, particularly to build on Fiona's earlier point, is if we can create a system in, particularly maybe starting in large organization, maybe in large technology organizations even, if we can create this system of constant culture hacks,
Yes.
where we bring people from all different walks of life together and look at a piece of the culture and just hack it towards something that we feel more us wanted to be part of that, then that would be something I would also look forward to.
Excellent, thank you. What can we do to address some of the early issues around gender inequality and enabling female talent, particularly at the starting stage when people are joining their careers and in education? How can we make sure that female talent starts striving at an early stage? And a sort of supplementary question, what advice would you give to your younger self if you were in this position now?
That's a long time ago, Amanda.
Well, I was about to say, hold on a second until I remember way back. What advice would I give to my younger self?
I'm happy to go first.
Go while I go back 25 years to the beginning of my career.
I've been asked this question a few times, and I think this week, with International Women's Day, I think it's something that comes up quite often. I'll answer the second part first, and then maybe go to the first one to give everyone else more time to think about the advice, if that works.
Thank you.
I would give myself two pieces of advice, my younger self 2 pieces of advice. One would be, don't sweat the small stuff. I think remembering when I was younger, small things would become very, very big things and take up a lot of my energy and attention. So don't sweat the small stuff. It all kind of works out, and have fun. The second piece of advice is to remember the power of your voice, and that you are here in this forum, in these groups, and at this table for a reason, and you deserve to be here as a woman of color. Take up that space as you need to, and never forget to use the voice. That would be the second piece.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Fiona, would you like to talk about your advice to your younger self before we answer the first part of Amanda's question?
Yeah, I suppose, as I say, I've been in tech for 25 years, straight out of university and into tech, and never left, good or bad. I love Rashi's 2 points. I think they are extremely valid, particularly the one about valuing your place, because oftentimes you do question it. Even now, you can, particularly when you walk into a room and you're the only one, that tends to cause you to question: is it me? Am I supposed to be here? Am I sure I can do this? So for sure, you need kind of self-belief. You need that confidence in the fact that you have a right to be there. I got some very good advice when I started out on my journey from my first manager in IBM, who said to me, always make sure that you do 1 thing or 2 things in your week to kind of move you to the next level. Have an idea in your mind, have a plan in your mind on where you want to go, and just tip away. They may be very, very small, but just do something that's away from the day-to-day to help you on that journey. And that's something that I always live by, and I always say it to any of the teams that I coach or mentor today. But the probably the overriding thing that I would say to my younger self is, you can do it, because oftentimes many people don't say that to you, right? You really do need to know that within yourself you have that capability, and it's always good to remind yourself that you can do it.
Yeah, and so I'm learning a lot from both of you, actually. So thank you, and thanks also for Rashi for giving me the time to think. But I think if I would look back, and then the advice I would give to myself is like, just try to master the art of growing up a little bit faster, and don't, which means, get to know yourself and who you are. Because I see too many people also when I, was in HR functions and, led bigger teams and bigger organizations, I saw people going after goals, going after prestige, stature, levels, without going after getting to know themselves first, and then become the person you're destined to be. So that's sort of what I call the art of growing up. I mean, just try to master that.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. I think that's the only thing, next to all of the mistakes I've made in the past, that I would have tried to do better. Just become more vulnerable and look more inside, and realize it is the head and the heart, which you need to get to know.
Excellent. That's really good.
So, Amanda, I think you asked the question on, what do we need to do to get more women or some girls into the workforce, or recruit at an early stage?
How do we help female talent thrive at that early stage, at education and early career stage?
Well, thrive. I talked about the fact that I don't always want to put it back on the women themselves, that you want to give them a culture, but one of the things that I think I have read and have noticed, access to mentorship and coaches is critically important when you come in at a level and you want to try and progress. And there is studies that say that female talent oftentimes ends up with mentorship that is not as senior, which is a big issue, right? So we need to be very balanced in how we give access to mentorship for young women, and maybe it's beyond mentorship and it's advocacy. So at a senior level, such as myself, we have to advocate for the women coming up. It doesn't mean I have to mentor every one of them. I hope there's too many that I would not be able to do it anyway. But we certainly have to advocate for talent. So I think it's important to create that culture for them, and to make sure also that their voices are heard. Very practical thing that I have noticed, which is very frustrating. We're in Teams calls all the time. Oftentimes we can find, if there are women on those calls, they maybe don't speak up as loudly as their male counterparts. So a very simple thing that we have to do is invite them into the conversation, right? Rashi, I think you maybe have something to add to the conversation. As simple as that, right? It's not a revolutionary thing. But it just invites, it breaks down that barrier and makes sure that the voice is heard and gives everybody the opportunity to shine. And I think for me, it's those couple of practical things to try and help young women as they move through the organization.
Yeah, I agree with you, Fiona. I think the way I would term advocacy would be sponsorship, through sponsorship programs versus mentorship. I think mentorship programs have been known to fail most of the time, while sponsorship programs create visibility, advocacy. You're connected to a leader with influence in the organization, and that can really speed up your trajectory in an organization. I've seen that work. I've implemented those programs in my career. But adding to the question, Amanda, I think I'm going to take a slightly different approach and talk about, I'll dub it as the pipeline, right? How do we build? We know there's a pipeline issue that everyone talks about. How do we solve for that, right? Especially when we think about STEM, women in technology. And I think there's a huge responsibility on organizations, on policymakers, on all of us as individuals to help promote these opportunities amongst younger girls, teenagers, show them what a career in robotics, what a career in engineering, what a career in science could look like, right? And I think there are so many different initiatives that I know many companies are undertaking, whether that's in the form of partnerships, donations to organizations that do this work, whether it's in the form of actually spending time at schools and universities with upcoming upright talent. But I think there's a huge we should be focusing a lot of our energy on that, because if we believe there's a pipeline issue, which people keep talking about, let's go out and solve it. And I think that's the biggest way that we can be impacting and making change happen for the long run.
Thank you. No, that's a really good point. Do you have anything you want to?
Yeah, I was also going along the mentorship and sponsorship path, but Rashi, again, I'm learning from you, so thank you. I think the mentorship and sponsorship part helps to use the networks of the organization to get to know the organization, and sometimes that's also how you get to know the culture faster. Right? So I think that was more the point I was going to. And I believe in addition to that, I think maybe sort of the elderly in the organization need to answer the call just to play that mentorship and sponsorship role without being asked. And I think if I would mention one thing they would need to build in that mentorship and sponsorship, it is resilience. Just like you, Fiona, what you said, like, I walk into the room, do I belong here? Which is like the imposter syndrome. Let's just make sure we're resilient to that. But also try to get a little bit of, like, I'm not sure if everybody knows, like, Pippi Longstocking, who said, I've never done it before, so I'm pretty sure I'm good at it. So that sort of mindset, without being not aware of how resilient you are, so make younger people, and that includes men, if it's up to me, just to make them slightly more resilient, and then combine them in mentorship and sponsorship to get to know the culture faster. I think that would help. I believe that would play a part.
That's great. Thank you very much. And one last quick question before we close. Could each of you give me a couple of positive things that you've taken out of the COVID lockdown that may help with inclusion going forward and helping female talent progress?
Yeah, I can go first, so we can end with the best. I think, as much as I hate my own Zoom fatigue, I actually enjoy the leap we've taken to become more technical in the way we work together. I think it also will help us over time to understand, to become more curious about technology, which brings the leap towards artificial intelligence, things like that, the digital workspace closer to us. And I think as the next step, where we've now covered sort of like where we work, if we can take the next step into sort of understanding when we work, which will make work more flexible even, I think that would be very positive if it's up to me.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no plug for the technology industry, but for sure, technology has a role to play in helping flexibility. And I think if we can take a positive from all of this, it's, we are actively driving the conversation about the future of work and what a workplace needs to look like. And that can only be a good thing because it's long overdue. And as I said, really at the beginning of my comments, even the most ardent traditionalist who subscribes to the old way of working has realized that it's not going to be effective anymore. So they're more willing to come to the table. So the time is now to act. We've got them to the table. Let's take that advantage of that and that redesigning of the new normal to really make sure that we're putting in the building blocks for equity. That's, to me, the single biggest thing we can do.
Agree.
Thank you.
I think those are both great points by Ad and Fiona. So I'm going to try and say something slightly different, and I completely agree with both of you. I think the past year has created a space and a need for organizations and leaders to have conversations on D&I that were not being had before. Whether it's because of course, Black Lives Matter last summer, the reports on women leaving the workplace, not just at the junior levels, but at senior levels, thinking about leaving the workplace. The conversation on mental health is happening in a way that it hasn't been had before. So I think those are, when I think about some of the positives, it's that creating that room for conversation is something that gives me hope that people are open to change and are actively thinking about it. Another piece that I want to call out, and Fiona kind of mentioned this, but I think people are much more intentional when we're on these Zoom calls and meetings. The context of talking over each other it doesn't happen as much as it used to, at least from my vantage point, as it was when we were in meetings in the same room. I think people and leaders are much more aware when they don't hear some people speak and creating the space for them. So I'm seeing much more intentionality in the way that we're operating and doing business, and that again gives me hope.
That's a good point.
It is, yes. Yeah. I'll give you a couple from my sector. We're notorious for long hours, and an average working week would have been pre-COVID this time last year 85 hours a week, both on site and in the office. And as a sector now, we recognise that's not sustainable. And even though working from home can promote longer working hours, actually in our sector it's slowed that down, and people have a genuine cut-off of work-life balance and recognising that they need to be away from the workplace. I think the other one that has really worked for us, technology has been great. We found different ways of doing things which traditions have gone out the window, for the simple reason that you can't do it that way anymore because you physically can't be there, you can't visit a site. We used to do lots and lots of international travel to visit our supply chain. Don't do that anymore. We can remotely do it. And it's, again, introduced that work-life balance. People aren't away from home for long periods. So there have been some real positives for us. I'd like to wrap it up now. The next session is due to start very soon. I'd really like to thank the contribution from Fiona, Rashi and Ad. It's been really good today. There's some great concepts and ideas have come out of this, certainly for me. And that's been a really good panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for moderating, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda. Thanks, everyone.
All right.